Today, we are going to take a behind-the-scenes look at the archives and special collections housed at UMD. Before we begin, I'd like to highlight some of our past programs. We've explored places like the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, Amsoil Arena, Superior Hiking Trail, the proposed UMD Sales Center, the Chocolate Lab, Romano Gym, and many more places. You can access all of these events on demand at our website, d.umn.edu/alumni. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our Alumni Relations website. You will receive an email with the link once that is ready. Finally, we will have time at the end of the presentation to answer some live questions. To submit a question, use the question and answer button on the bottom of your screen. Now to introduce our guests. Today, we will hear from Matt Rosendahl and Amy Brown. Matt is the director of the Catherine A. Martin Library. He holds a Master of Library and Information Science from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and is active in library efforts locally on the Duluth Public Library Board, regionally on the Arrowhead Library System Board, and nationally on the Executive Committee of the Partnership for Shared Book Collections. Amy is the Archivist and Curator of Special Collections at the Catherine A. Martin Library. She holds a Master of Library and Information Science with a concentration in Archives Management from Simmons College. I will now hand it over to Matt and Amy.
Thanks, Molly, and thank you all for being here today. We're really excited to talk to you generally about our archives and special collections, but I have the fortunate honor to start the presentation today by talking about some of the new things coming for our archives and special collections. And that's related to our facilities. Our archives and special collections are held in the building that is now known as the Library Annex, though many of you may remember this building as the old Medical Sciences Library building. It is attached to the back end of the new library, the red brick Catherine A. Martin Library. For over 20 years, this building has served the library and the campus well. We hold not only our archives and our special collections there, but we also hold our periodicals in the building. And I've got another image that we'll show you from the 90s. And the building looks much the same from these pictures from the 90s as it does today. While this building has served us well for holding our collections and providing space for researchers to use them and for students to study, the building has a woefully underperforming HVAC system. And given that this building is holding these rare materials that Amy's going to tell you more about, it's a high priority that we update the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning to the updated required standards for archives and special collections materials. I'm excited that the campus is approved a project where we will partner with the Leibovitz School of Business and Economics to reimagine this building. We've entered into a pre-design that you can see here that outlines what the bottom and second floor of the building will look like. We're able to make space for this new sales center in this building by downsizing our periodicals collection. The physical journals and magazines that we've loaned to patrons, many of them are now available online. And so those physical journals that we have online access to, we're able to move out of that building. And through this remodeling project, the sales center will move in. I encourage you to visit the Alumni Office website to learn more about the exciting sales center project. For us, this is transformative in how we care for and work with these materials and how we welcome and host researchers from all around the world and students to use the materials. The lower level of the library annex will be completely dedicated to the collections to be stored in high density compact shelving in low temperature with very low humidity, stable temperatures and humidity, so that we can preserve these papers and photographs and videos for generations of Bulldogs to come. The second floor, the part where you can see the cursor moving now, is the part that will be dedicated to archives and special collections. There'll be areas for processing and working with incoming collections. There'll be a space to greet researchers for them to do on-site research with these materials, offices for our archive staff, and we'll be able to retain private study rooms and open study space for all of our Bulldogs to come and use who love studying in the annex. If you're interested in learning more about this project, you can reach out to me anytime. We have opportunities to support the archives that'll be shared after this presentation, but I wanted you to know that there's a bright future ahead for these historical resources. And now I'm going to turn over the presentation to Amy Brown, who's going to tell us what is an archives and special collections and what do we have here at UMD. Amy?
Hi, I'm so glad. Anyway, first, I want to thank all of you for all the ways that the alumni support and use the archives. Today, I'm going to give you a broad overview of what an archives is, what's in the UMD archives, how the archives is used, and what we collect. As you can see here, this is an illustration of our mascot from the 1947 UMD student yearbook. And we have this both online and in hard copy. So according to the Society of American Archivists, and Archives is an organization dedicated to preserving the documentary heritage of a particular group of people, organization, geographical area, or subject. And these images are of a cross-country team from UMD. And if you happen to know who any of these people are, please put that information in the chat. These materials weren't labeled. And I think it might be from the early 80s, but I'm not sure. If you have a guess at the year, I would also appreciate that. And I can look at that information later on, or you could contact the archives later. Thank you. So one of the things I'd like to talk about today is how archives are different from libraries. And one of those ways is that many of the things in an archives are unpublished or original materials, whereas many things in libraries are mass-produced and primarily published materials, such as books or published articles. A lot of the materials in archives are hard copy materials that have to be used on site. Although we also do have digital materials, and we do have the ability to scan some materials for researchers. But the difference is, in a library, people usually access things either through an online database that the library subscribes to, or they can come in and look for a hard copy book and check that book out and take it with them. In archives, the collections can be one item, such as a photograph, or over 100 boxes of a very large collection, for example, a large business or a government organization or something like that. And in a library, there are primarily individual items, such as books, journals, articles, films, etc., whether they're digital or in hard copy. In an archives, the storage areas are closed to the public, and staff retrieve materials for researchers and bring them to the research room where researchers can use them. Whereas in a library, usually people can come in and browse the stacks. Another difference is that in archives, the cataloging or description of the materials is usually at a broader level, not necessarily at an item level, as it would be in the library. For example, if you look in an online database or in an online catalog for the library, you will usually find descriptions for individual books or articles, whereas in the archives, it's probably broader. And an example of that might be, let's see, for example, alumnus Tony Durkins writes many books about the history of Duluth. And while you can find his published books in both the Duluth Public Library and the UMD Library, excuse me, he's done a lot of research in archives, and that could include anything from the records of, specific businesses, government records from the Duluth City Parks Department, photography collections, oral histories, etc. And getting back to how the description or cataloging of archives is a little bit different from libraries. For example, say I wanted to find information on a specific hockey game. I might look at a collection, for example, a Department of Intercollegiate Athletics, and I might not find anything indexed on that specific game, although you never know, but I'd be more likely to find a folder that could be labeled something like hockey programs for 1983 to 1984. And so then if I thought it occurred during that year, I would browse that folder. Or for example, if someone contacts me looking for a photograph of a particular elementary school, and we don't have the records from that particular school or parent-teacher association for that school, I might check the Duluth News Tribune photograph collection, which we have, and they also might not have anything under that particular school indexed, but they might have a file called elementary schools that contained numerous photos of elementary schools from the 20th century, and then I would browse and find it. So it can be more time consuming to do this kind of research. And whereas in a library, again, research can also be time consuming, but you might have a more detailed description of each item, as opposed to a more broad description at a higher level of materials. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about how archives are different from museums. And we're very lucky at UMD to have two great museums, the Tweed Museum of Art and the Glensheen Mansion or Historic Condon Estate. And the archives has collections from both of those museums. And one of the main differences is that people usually come to an archives to do research on a particular topic. And people usually visit museums to tour the museum or see exhibits. At an archives, people usually make an appointment to do research and have talked with the archive staff in advance to let them know which collections or materials to have pulled out for them. Whereas people can usually stop by a museum anytime during the open hours. And archival collections tend to be two-dimensional, such as photos, letters, diaries, records of organizations, that kind of thing, whereas many museums focus on three-dimensional objects as well as two-dimensional objects. So what's in the UMD archives? As a broad overview, we have university history, and that can include faculty, staff, and departmental files, things like meeting minutes, conference papers, scholarly work, photos, posters, newsletters, publicity, student life materials, records of student organizations. I chose this photo of Robert Paulus because UMD just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the American Indian Studies Department and the Indigenous Student Organization. And Paulus was the first director of the American Indian Studies Department. I also chose this photo because it's from a very large collection of images that takes up several file cabinets that was transferred to the archives a few years ago. And it's full of photographic negatives taken by former campus photographers, primarily Ken Moran. And I'll talk a little bit more about that collection as we go through the presentation. We also collect a lot of local history materials documenting northeastern Minnesota. And that could be everything from materials created by or about families, individuals, businesses, all kinds of organizations, religious, social, political, etc. Let's see, in some of just a few examples of some things that have come in since I've been here over the past few years are the Duluth News Tribune photo collection, the West End Senior Center records, a couple of World War II photo albums and scrapbooks from two Duluthians and UMD supporters, Erwin Goldfein and Julia Marshall, the Duluth Interfaith Sanctuary Committee records. And again, there's so much more I could tell you about all of these collections, but I'm going to just give you a broad overview today, and I'll be glad to talk more about these things another time if you're interested. And we have many formats of materials, from letters, financial records, photos, we collect menus, we have born digital materials, we have films. And I also want to talk about how everything is connected. The history of UMD is part of the regional history and vice versa. So the collections work very well together. So as you can see, this is one of the rows in the archive storage. We put things in acid-free boxes like this brown box here and also this gray box. And we also put materials in acid-free folders. And we have over 10,000 linear feet of materials. One common question I get is, why isn't everything online now? And the archives does contribute material, both things that we digitize and things that are born digital, to 3 different digital repositories. I'm going to talk about 2 of them today that are both based at the Twin Cities campus of the U of M. And, you know, in general, my thought about digital materials is that when people have access to both, it's really the best of both worlds, because you can't replace the experience of interacting with most original hard copy materials. You know, for example, a 17th century book or a telegram or something handwritten. But it's also facilitates access and research for people from any part of the world, as well as in a dorm room, to be able to study and get access to something and download it 24/7. So I am glad that we are able to digitize some of our collections, and that's something that's ongoing. It is very labor intensive, partly because it's not just scanning, but it's, you know, scanning to certain standards for the digital repositories, and then we do description of each individual item, for example, each photo that we scan. And then we need to have software solutions that will provide for the long-term preservation of these digital assets and also for long-term access for the public. So we have to prioritize. Oops. One of the digital repositories is called the University Digital Conservancy. And here are some examples of some sports media guides that are in the University Digital Conservancy. It's a wonderful resource. I encourage you to explore it. It includes a lot of print material created by, and other materials created by UMD and university-wide students, staff, and faculty. That includes posters, press releases, yearbooks, etc. And I want to give a shout out to the digital services department in the library. My coworkers, Laura Vervrowski, the student workers she supervised, and Plamen Miltenoff, because they've really supported the archives by all the work that they've done with the University Digital Conservancy. Laura, who's been here for over 4 years, has especially done a lion's share of work to get more archival material into it and continues to do so. Another repository we participate in is called UMedia. And again, here are some images from the campus photographers collection. And we have added over 6,000 photos so far, also some film, oral histories, and other miscellaneous items. And the way that UMedia is a little different from the University Digital Conservancy is that this is where we tend to add photographic material and also, like I said, film or video or oral histories, but we can also add some local history collections here. It's not strictly a university created materials, although we definitely have some there. So I want to talk a little bit about one of our local history collections as an example. So if you're not familiar with Helen Hoover, she was a best-selling Minnesota nature writer who lived on the Gunflint Trail north of Grand Marais with her illustrator husband, Adrian Hoover. And before moving up there, she was a metallurgist in Chicago. And at any rate, here are some of her published books. And here's an article published about her. Again, these are the kind of materials you would find in the library or in many libraries. And here you'll see some examples of materials from their collection. So here's a box and you can see all kinds of papers sticking out. Their collection includes, again, the photos you see in the folder to the left and all kinds of correspondence, drafts of writing. And then if we go to the next slide, you'll see a folder that has some of Abe's illustrations, as well as we have a whole box of home movies in their collection. And 4 of these home movies have been digitized and are now available in UMedia. And you can also see sometimes materials come in without a whole lot of order. Sometimes they're labeled, sometimes they're not. So that is part of the work of the archives to create guides and inventory and try to place things in acid-free materials so that they will be preserved for the long term. Another thing I wanted to talk more about is some of the connections between the work of the faculty and staff and students at UMD and the community. And some of the publications and materials we have in the archives from the Leibovitz School of Business and Economics, Bureau of Business and Economic Research is a really good example of that. And as you can see, some of these reports I have pictured here, these are all available in the University Digital Conservancy, and more are slowly being added. And I found when I was looking at the West End market analysis, I was just thinking about Lincoln Park and how many questions we get about Lincoln Park and buildings there and the history there recently, and notice this list of businesses in 1980 on West Superior Street. So I just decided to see what else I could find related to a couple of these businesses. So I found some pictures in the archives of Curly's Bar from 1980. And then I also, I shouldn't say just found, they were described and indexed, so I was able to find them by archivists. this picture of what was then the Duluth tent awning in 1975 from the Duluth News Tribune photograph collection. And the archives also hold some records from the Duluth Tent Awning Company, their financial ledgers from 1915 to 1949. So we also hold records and have also digitized a number of records from both the Congdon family and about the history of Glen Sheen as an historic site. So let's see here. I also want to note we have digitized some home movies from the Congdon family and also made those available on UMedia, as well as photographs and blueprints and things like that. And I just want to briefly mention that these are a couple of photos from the Glen Sheen collection, and that sometimes one class that I've worked with photos from various collections is a history of photography class. And that's always really fun because we have all kinds of old photos, including formats such as tintypes or very large glass plate negatives. And that is a good example of the kind of thing that it just isn't the same to look at a digital surrogate of. So in March of 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic started to affect UMD, my coworker Shauna Ah suggested that we look into starting a project to document the pandemic in our area. And part of the reason we decided to do that was because a couple of years earlier, during 2018, we got a lot of questions about the 1918 fire and flu pandemic. And so we thought people will definitely want to know what life was like during this time, especially firsthand accounts. We were also thinking about what could we do when we were working from home. We'd been wanting to try some kind of digital collecting project for a while. And we also have been wanting to do something that might involve both campus and community together. So with lots of support from the library, we started the Northeastern Minnesota COVID-19 Community Archives Project. We already have added 750 or over 750 items to UMedia that were submitted by community and campus participants. And we still are collecting submissions, although we receive very few at this point, but we are still collecting from people in Northeastern Minnesota. And as you can see from this drawing that a student did for a course here, it was a very hard time for many students, as well as, of course, many other people. And one very exciting thing that happened as part of this project was that two faculty members applied and received for a National Endowment for the Humanities grant that supported over 100 interviews and creative works being added to this project. That's a very interesting project. I encourage you to learn more about it. See, so who uses the archives? Well, the most important thing I want to say is that everyone is welcome, and it gets used for many things, many of them unexpected. And it is, I always emphasize to the students that this is not just for scholarly or classwork. It can really be for anything. I mean, it's also for fun. And you'll see in this picture, Dr. Tu, who has brought her class in the picture to use materials from one of our special collections, the Ramseur Northern Bible Society collection. And if you haven't seen it already, I encourage you to watch Dr. Tu's presentation on some of the Geneva Bibles from this collection. And this is a really great collection to teach about the material, culture, and history of the book, medieval publishing, etc. And I always learn a lot from Dr. Tu, and I really enjoy working with her students. So another thing that I enjoy as part of my work at the archives is working with student interns. And most of our interns are public history majors, and they're doing internships for academic credit, and I coordinate that with history department faculty. And again, right now, their primary projects have been with the campus photographers collection. And many of them don't know what a negative is until they start working here. Here are a couple examples of the photographic negative files that they're working with. And it's partly thanks to the student interns that we have some of these photographs available in the digital repository now. So I'm very thankful for their work. They're also doing research and creating description for these photos. And we've had one intern who also worked at Glensheen, so that was really helpful in working through some of the Glensheen photos. I could see I'm running a little short of time, so I'm going to try to move a little more quickly. We also had a student intern from the American Indian Studies Department who did some very important work with the Fond du Lac Ojibwe Heritage Collection, Jimmy Jackson Sr., Ojibwe Medicine Man. This collection includes raw video footage that was used to create the documentary about Mr. Jackson, A Gift to One, A Gift to Many. And the intern reviewed some of this footage for potentially culturally sensitive materials to possibly be referred to the UMD American Indian Archives Advisory Council. Also had some students doing some research on the history of the campus land. Some students were working for the Office of Sustainability and looking into the land that is now the Land Lab, but used to be the Northeast Experiment Station. And that collection is about 38 to 40 boxes. And that research will be ongoing. And I'm so glad this collection is being used. And also another intern looked into the history of the land that the campus is currently on. And if you'd like more information on that, there's an article that she wrote in the University Digital Conservancy. So who donates collections to the archives? Lots of different people, and I'm very grateful to them. So on the left, you'll see Dr. Olga Lakala, who was the founder of the herbarium here. And her collection that she donated includes some of her bird observation notes and this wonderful photo of the Duluth Bird Club. And recently, I was delighted that Associate Professor Emeritus David Schimpf came in and showed me this box of an old format of slides that had belonged to Dr. Lakala, which we think are from Park Point. And since this presentation is geared toward alumni, I wanted to talk a little bit about student life. So this poster is from a recent event, and I just wanted to say that a lot of students are very curious about what student life was like in the past, and sometimes come to the archives and ask what we have. I would love to have more materials documenting student life, especially student organizations that could be official or informal, and just other things that, might not have been captured or could be captured more outside of the student newspaper, for example, and I've listed several areas of interest here and types of things that we collect. And again, there's a link on my last slide to a guide to donating materials, and I will be happy to also talk with people about this. We already have plenty of copies of the yearbook as well as the student newspaper. And I would say, I welcome very much your questions about potential donations, but we also can't collect everything. So I have to think about the university's mission and the resources and staffing needed for a long-term commitment to care for and provide access to these collections when I'm making decisions about this. And I'm working on a more comprehensive collection development plan. I will be working on that over the next year or so. So here's some more information and some links that might be useful to you. But mostly I want to say thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your support and interest in the archives and the library.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us about this important community resource and providing us a glimpse of the future of archives and special collections. We are now going to transition to our live question and answer. So we will flip our cameras on here and get started taking questions. Perfect. Well, we did have a number of questions come in through the registration, so I will try to get through as many as time allows. Also, as a reminder, if you have questions that have come up since the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen. So just hit that and then you can type your question in and I will try to get to as many of them as I can. So I know you talked a little bit about this, Amy, but we had a lot of questions coming in about just kind of your protocol for donations. So trying to kind of group them together, but is there something, I know you talked about the student life aspect of UMD, but is there something that is really on your dream list right now of different materials that you're looking to collect right now?
Thank you for the question. I would say in terms of student life, I would love to have more materials related to student organizations. They could be official student organizations, or they could be just, an unofficial club, or also collaborations between students and off-campus organizations. That could be, say you had an internship off campus, or say you were involved in volunteering with an organization off campus too. And I guess the first step would be just to contact me or send it to the general or call me. But I think sending some information, if you're able to, by email is helpful. Just kind of general time period. Is it something that's more or less than one banker's box of materials and just approximate decade? That's really helpful to me to know those things, so I have an idea of what's there. But yeah, and photos are great, especially if you have an idea of, who's in the photo, and we also want to be mindful that these things will be open to the public. So if it's something you feel like should be not open to the public, either because of a third party in a photograph or something like that, just to be mindful of that. But, and I love flyers, posters. Sometimes there are alternative publications from the past that students produced. So I hope that's, again, I can talk more about that, and I hope to develop more materials, but I'd really love to have some things like that, but not only that. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. This question is directed towards Matt. I know that you had hopped in on the chat box during the presentation, but perhaps for those that haven't been following along, could you talk a little bit about how people can access the online resources?
Yeah, when our staff in digital services and the archives digitize items and store them in the repositories that Amy mentioned, those are freely available to everyone on the web, wherever you are in the world. So there's no logins required. And in fact, most of them are discoverable through Google. However, Amy's helped us out by creating a research guide, which I linked to in the chat. And in the presentation that Amy gave today, you saw there was a slide with a number of links that can be shared via the alumni office for easy access. And we invite you to look at those. You can always search for University Digital Conservancy and UMD or UMedia, and you'll be able to get access to those repositories.
Perfect, thank you. And then in terms of for someone just starting their research journey, what would you recommend kind of be the first step when connecting with you all on using the archives and special collections as a resource?
Or I guess there's a couple things. I think, we will be redoing our webpage this year, which has needed it for quite a while. But I think if someone is looking at something that's a very broad local history issue, like for example, could be, the history of shipping, for example, or railroads or something like that, I might first look at published sources first to get an overview of the topic, whether it's, Duluth Public Library, excuse me, has a great collection of, but if you're looking specifically to get started in archival research and you kind of have a good idea of that, I think searching our database for records, but I think just sending an email to the archives and saying, this is what I'm interested in, and I'm wondering what you recommend for getting started. Because sometimes it really depends what the topic is, because sometimes people might just say, well, I'm really just looking for a photo of this or something about this, or other people might be, I'm writing a book about this topic. And sometimes I might say, well, we have this, and you should also contact the Iron Range Research Center in Chisholm, or, something like that. So it's fine to contact us and just give us as much information as you can. I'm just starting, or I've already done this, or, that's fine.
And then this question is for Matt. You had touched on it a little bit in the beginning, but we had one come in wondering a little bit more about the plans for expanding the space. If you can share a little bit more about that. I know you had shared the plans, but is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of the new space?
I should talk about timeline. I realized I omitted that. We're planning on moving into design phase this summer, which will be the full construction schematic markups of the pre-design, the floor plans I displayed during my presentation. If that all goes smoothly and all the funding falls into place, we'll be breaking ground in summer 2024, hoping to open in 2025. And we're excited because of the fact that not only will we have the top tier climate controls and storage for these materials, but the space that our staff and our researchers and students need to do their work while preserving study space for the students who just love studying in the annex, where there's quiet space, you can get away from everything. We're trying to preserve all the best aspects of it.
Perfect, thank you. And then kind of going back to donations, we had a couple questions wondering about just different types of materials. And Amy, you had mentioned there was some footage and film and that sort of thing. There's a couple questions just wondering about donating books and also visual archives of the Duluth Theater program. So wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the different types of materials. I know that you had mentioned that Northeastern Minnesota regionally collecting archives on the history of that. So that kind of weaves into the Duluth Theater. But if you could just talk a little bit about the various types of materials that you would accept.
Sure. Yeah, we're very interested in photographs and film and video of all kinds. And so that's definitely part of it. In terms of like the visual history of theater, I mean, that's a wonderful part of the history of this area. We may have some things, but I'd definitely be interested in talking to anyone about that. I'm wondering if they need maybe, like broadsides or programs or posters. So we definitely have those kinds of materials in the archives. For example, we have some posters from the Homegrown Music Festival. That would be a more recent thing. But yeah, I think those are, beautiful things and really interesting part of the history here of the arts and culture of the area. Yeah.
And a lot of these questions that are coming in are very specific. So I would just encourage, if you have a very specific question, just to email archives directly. So
Yes.
some of those.
And yeah, that's completely fine. And I have some Society of American Archivists brochures that I send out sometimes that I can talk to people, and they're also helpful to kind of read through, to just things that may be helpful to think through.
Perfect. Another question just came in, and I'll let the two of you decide who would like to respond. But could you share a bit about any collaborations between archives and specific classes and courses? Are there attempts to connect with more classes? Matt or Amy?
Sure. Yes, things, a lot of things were affected by the pandemic, but I can tell you about some of the classes that I've worked with. Again, Dr. Krista Tu's classes have used, extensively worked with all kinds of book history and medieval publishing, and done, her students have done exhibits on the 4th floor of the library that anyone can walk up and see. It's near the stairs that provide historical context to the books that the students worked with. I've also worked with history of photography classes, and that's they usually visit once, and I pull out every different kind of format of photograph that I have for them to look at. Another class did a history of Canal Park using GIS mapping, kind of a story map. It was a visual journalism class. And that was fun because I think the groups of students take, for example, a decade each of Canal Park, and they used old city directories to say, okay, during whatever, say the 1940s, these were the businesses that were on these blocks in Canal Park, and then looked for photos in the archives from that decade. And some people even found things like menus. That's why, when you think about the history of Duluth, there's all kinds of ephemera that is helpful. Like I said, I wish we had more menus, because sometimes students were saying, well, what do you have about this restaurant? And, we don't actually have a lot about restaurants except that they existed. That's one example. That was a fun one. Sometimes I would say public history, the primary way I work with them is through individual interns, but sometimes I have talked with the class a little bit about archives in general. It's kind of, sometimes it depends on the individual faculty member. For example, I've had a advanced research methods geography class come in, and advanced research methods social work class come in, because the faculty wanted to expose them to some different research methods. So the geography class was using some fire insurance maps from the early part of the 20th century, and just wanted to get some of the things they were finding on the maps to see if we had any history about them, and just how the students would go about finding them. And in terms of the history of social work in this area, we looked at some of the institutions in Duluth, such as the Bethel, the history of that, and some sort of, I guess what you would call now might be wellness programs that Oliver Iron Mining Company had. So it's kind of interesting. It could be used in lots of different ways, or a student might just come in and say, hey, what was going on in regarding this issue, or the parking issues on campus is asked about every now and then, or what were the dorms like, or it can be, I hope that answers your question. I don't want to go on too long, but it can be a variety of issues. But because we primarily have 20th century history. It's not necessarily just history courses.
Sure. And I think we will end on this last question for each of you to respond to, but what is your favorite part about archives and special collections? So I will start with Matt.
Oh, I think that most people on this call are going to agree with me that there is something special about this campus and this place we get to live in. And the fact that this archives and special collections contains the evidence of what has made it so special, of its rich history, and that it's there and accessible for everyone. It's not locked behind only for professors or something, that it's shared with the world online and for folks to come in person. I love that. And I'm glad that we get to contribute to people understanding the history of this great place.
Great. Amy?
Yeah, I love connecting people with the history, both because I think a lot of people might not be aware of, well, I want more people to be aware of what they have access to, whether it's online or in hard copy. And also I learn things, you know, some of the people that come in, anyway, so that's the best thing.
Great. Well, and I think we'll close out on that. I did want to mention a few things. I know, Amy, you had put a plug in for Dr. Krista Tu's virtual behind the scenes, and she's actually done 2 sessions. And so folks can access those on our YouTube page on demand. So she did the King James Bible and then also the Geneva Bible for those that are interested. And then we also actually hosted Dr. Olga Lakala's Herbarium with Amanda Gruz. So that's also on our on demand too. So it's kind of fun having some of the intersecting programs. Finally, for those that enjoyed this type of session, on August 22nd, we are highlighting and featuring the Large Lakes Observatory. So keep an eye out for communication on that. And I just want to give a heartfelt thanks to both of you for joining us today and sharing a little bit about this really unique and important resource on campus. So thank you so much. And we hope to see you all again at future alumni events. Thank you. Have a good day.